This was a really big week for Star Wars fans. The release of Rogue One jumps the storyline of the 7 existing Star Wars sagas and slips one sort of in between the chapters. It purports to tell the story of the brave and heroic rebels who managed to steal the plans to the Empire's Death Star, the plans that Princess Leia hid in R2-D2 in the first movie that was released in 1977. Of course, other than some basement-dwelling, perpetually virgin nerds, everyone knows that this is a movie that is not about real people or real events. Science fiction typically goes a step beyond mere fiction. Science fiction typically doesn't just tell an imaginary story about something that didn't or hasn't happened. Science fiction, like Rogue One, tells a fantastic story about something that a rational person would realize simply cannot happen. And yet, I was there on opening night, and if you promise not to think less of me, I'll tell you that I'm probably going to go again this week. The point of such a movie is not to inform. It doesn't teach you any facts about history or science, and arguably, I would have to admit that it really isn't very good literature. But I go because it's a story about a handful of people who find the courage to fight against the overwhelming power of the Empire. And of course, as can only happen in the movies, even though most of the heroes die in the process of accomplishing their goal, they are victorious. I spoke to my friend Manar Shabuk just before I went to the movies. Manar is a refugee from Aleppo who is now teaching Arabic in New York. I've thought about her every day this week as the Syrian government finished the horror of their genocide in her home city, even shooting at ambulances and school buses that were attempting to escape the final destruction of that once great city. I said to Manar, I wish you could come see the movie with me. At least in the theater, a few good people can beat an empire. And she replied, good people beat tyrants and dictators every day. Actually, she said, good people beat tyrants and assholes every day. And we will eventually win. I don't know, though. One day, according to the Bible, David slew Goliath, but in my experience, most days, Goliath pretty easily has a David sandwich, which is, of course, why we tell stories like the story of David and Goliath. That's why we go to see movies like Rogue One. We tell stories to inspire hope, hope that maybe gives us courage to face seemingly insurmountable odds. The stories we always read in churches this time of year about the birth of Jesus are basically stories of David and Goliath. When it comes right down to magical stars that lead a band of astrologers or choirs of winged angels singing above the earth, then they come close to being beyond fiction, like Rogue One. Because they're not just fictional, they are stories that include elements of the impossible, which, as I said about Star Wars movies, could only be taken seriously by the sort of basement-dwelling, perpetually virgin sorts who take both the implausible and the impossible as being real. If you try to make Luke's version of Christmas fit with Matthew's version, you lose all credibility just before you lose your mind. In a reverse dragnet, Matthew and Luke preserve the names, Joseph, Mary, and Jesus, but they mess up all the facts. In Matthew, the Holy Family lives in a house in Bethlehem and only resettles in Nazareth under the threat of a new ruler of the empire. Only Matthew talks about the star and the wise men and the flight to Egypt. Only Luke talks about a census, the trip from Nazareth to Bethlehem, and giving birth in a stable. And only Luke knows about shepherds and angels. They tell two completely different stories that cannot in any way accurately be depicted in a manger scene. However, the stories can be put together in a meaning sense. That is, they are both stories intended to inspire hope in the face of insurmountable odds. The only way to miss the hopeful and even radical message hidden within the Christmas story is to try to take it literally. If you try to make it a historical account, it loses all meaning. It is better if we would just take them like a couple of fiction movies. Don't try to make yourself believe that Jesus was really born in a stable in Bethlehem to a virgin mother. Just sit back and experience the story. Both of the birth narratives look like they were artificially added to their respective gospel hosts as an afterthought. The elements of the stories do not appear anywhere else in the Gospels of Matthew or Luke. There's no winged angels in other parts of Luke. There's no visions and dreams given to people in the rest of Matthew. And we have a pretty good version of Proto-Luke that Marcion had that did not have any birth narrative in it at all. Mark doesn't have one. John doesn't have one. These were, I think, sermons concocted out of someone's imagination to give a kind of introduction to the Jesus story, maybe to prop up Jesus' resume a little bit, to make him like the claims that were made for certain emperors and philosophers that he was born of a virgin. But they are also intended to give readers in a very dark time a little bit of light. The story is set in a tiny nation that has just lately become a part of the ever-expanding Roman Empire. People were being enslaved in the public works projects of building roads, sewers, aqueducts, coliseums, and public buildings, all of which costs a lot of money, and the people were being taxed into poverty. What middle class may have once existed among the trades had joined the ranks of the always nervous poor who perpetually stand at the edge of extinction. And the emperor had appointed one of the really paranoid Herod, the big family of Herods. This one was a man whose ego was trumped only by his self-destructive paranoia. I don't know if that sounds familiar to anybody, but sometimes the Bible comes to life on MSNBC, doesn't it? The people around Jesus' birth had enjoyed a brief time of self-rule, a time of rebuilding family businesses, of improving the family farm, but that time had come to a sudden end, and there was not much light on the horizon. No credible reason to believe that things would get any better anytime in the foreseeable future, and in truth, by the time these stories were being written down, there had been a virtual Holocaust and their nation had been destroyed. For years, our generation, have talked about where we were and what was going on in our lives when we first heard about the attacks on 9/11. Everybody here, except maybe Coco, can remember where we were when the Challenger blew up. Most of us have at least a faint memory, I'm testing you now, of where you were when John Kennedy was assassinated. But now we all have an election day memory to talk about. I was scuba diving in Belize. I went to bed with absolute certainty that Clinton would win the election in a landslide, and I awoke to the awful news that the man who wants to deport millions of Hispanics, who has sexually assaulted women, who wants to ban all Muslims from our nation, who insults and stereotypes black people, who wants to take away the rights of gay couples to love one another and the right of women to manage their own reproductive lives, all under the banner of Make America Great Again. Well, we'll all be telling that story for a while, won't we? And in the months since we awoke to this awful news, have you found yourself wanting to give up? We fought so hard on so many causes. Have you felt the gravitational pull that makes you want to shrug your shoulders and just say it's too hard to start over again? Having lost so much of what we thought we had won in a lifetime of moral progress, we discover that our nation is not what we thought it was. Our advocacy, our protests, our demonstrations, our voting, our donating, our door knocking. How does Darth Vader, Donald Trump, get to drag our nation back into segregation, into homophobia, misogyny, and xenophobia? It makes me tired to think about it. I mean, in the last month, I can't tell you how many times I've just woken up tired and fantasizing about retirement, that it's just not worth fighting it again. Now, in the movies, when you get to that dark point, the resolution comes through a superhero who has superpowers. It's the X-Men, it's the Avengers, it's Superman or Batman, it's Doctor Strange or Luke Skywalker. It's never just a normal Joe. It's always someone with superpowers that is able to set the balance right. The Christmas story, ironically, is the opposite of all of that. And it's not like the biblical narrative couldn't have included a superhero. They did that sometimes. Elijah, Elisha, they had superhero stories. The oldest story in the world, Gilgamesh, was the story of the strongest man in the world, the virtual Superman of ancient Sumer, who could set things right. But in Matthew, it's just a baby that the empire already wants to kill. A baby that in Luke has to worry about where they settle down to be sure that they don't fall under the sword of the empire right away. And yet, it is a baby who from the first day of his birth draws the poor to his side, who brings foreigners, people of other and strange religions, the powerless and the dispossessed, brings them to his cradle. In Luke, the baby inspires his mother to sing, and she sings about how the mighty have been cast down from their thrones and how the lowly have been lifted up. She sings about how the rich have been sent empty away and the chronically poor and hungry have been filled. Now, we haven't seen that yet, right? We haven't seen that. And at the time it was written, it hadn't happened yet. But they're saying that the hope of that reality, the hope of the reign of God, could come to us in a tiny and powerless child. The story closes with Herod still on the throne, Caesar still in Rome, with all the darkness of the empire still all around them. But there is this baby. And in this baby, readers are being told they have reason to hope. Now, you all know how much I love Bruce Coburn's song, Lovers in a Dangerous Time, where he says that we have to keep kicking at the darkness until it bleeds daylight. Against everything in us that is tired and despondent and wants to give up, we have to look for little ways in which we can still kick at the darkness until it bleeds daylight. I can only comfort my friend who has survived the fall of Aleppo until Aleppo can rise again from the ashes. And she intends to go back. She is not making America her permanent home. She believes her people have a future. I cannot stop the pipeline in North Dakota, but I can take food and firewood and hats and gloves and some hope to my native brothers and sisters who are camping in sub-zero weather at Standing Rock. Those of you here already know about this, but for the benefit of our internet audience, let me tell you that we have a teacher in our church, Holly Ketchum, who has proposed to publish a children's book about what really makes America great. Holly and David have taught in Russia. They've done relief work in Cambodia. They have put their very souls into living with conscience. And now, with the prospect of seeing so much hate and prejudice spread across our country, Holly has proposed to write a children's book about inclusion. Inclusion of people of different sexual orientations, of differing abilities, different races, different religions. And she wants to hire illustrators from among those marginalized communities to create the pictures for this children's book. Because what makes America great is when we can welcome a Syrian refugee, or thousands of them. when we can help an undocumented worker to become a documented worker. What makes America great is when we can meet people who speak another language, who practice a different religion, who even love and create family differently than we do, and rather than reject them, we include them, we embrace them, and we try to learn from them. We try to learn about their religion. We try to learn some of their language. I don't want to offend any of our international listeners, but I do have to say this. America is great. America leads the world in scientific innovation, in invention, in medical research, in engineering, in computer sciences, and our universities are the envy of the world. Even our music, our movies, our literature are all just amazing because, specifically because, and these things are only true because of our diversity. That is what makes America great. White Protestants, we've contributed a good deal to the world, but you wouldn't want to live in a world that didn't enjoy the innovations of our Jewish scientists, of Jewish composers and movie directors. You wouldn't want to live in a world that hadn't been changed by Martin Luther King. Heck, you wouldn't want to be in a church whose music program had actually done what conservative churches say they want to do and expel all of their gay and lesbian members. They wouldn't have a music program. So I'm committed to helping Holly to raise a few $1,000s to get this book produced, and any of you can help contribute to this project. We don't need a lot of money, but we need a few $1,000s to get it done, because I want, before 2017 is over, to be able to go to some of our local schools and sit on the floor with 5- and 6-year-old children and engage them in reading this book that teaches them to see people who are different from them as being the very best thing that's ever happened to them. I want to infuse the coming generation with a kind of moral vision of the future that will make America great again. This is how we're going to beat the negative, misogynistic, racist, homophobic, Islamophobic tendencies that we have seen in our nation currently. We're going to outlive them. We're going to teach a coming generation to think with greater insight. I wish that we could just blow up a Death Star and go on to the celebration, but that isn't how we win. We have to see that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice if we work to bend it. We will win by kicking at the darkness until it bleeds daylight. We lost an election, but I will not lose my hope. Amen.
Thank you for watching our videos. We are entirely dependent on the donations of our listeners and members. We hope that you find this content to be important enough to help us to keep offering these videos to the public at no charge by becoming a regular contributor. Please click on the donate button on our website at www.spfccc.org. Thank you for your support of progressive religious programming.